Today is September 17th, 2012, and we're speaking with Mickey King and Marianne Hayes. And the interviewers are myself, Dan Reiter, and Roz Foster. So, over the years, the Cocoa Beach area and around Canaveral Pier have produced some of the world's best surfers and surfboard shapers. Today, we're going to talk about the history of surfing in Florida and how the Space Coast came to be the surf capital of the East Coast. Good morning, Mickey and Marianne. Mickey.
Good morning.
Morning, Dan.
Good morning. Mickey, I understand you come from a long line of watermen, and in fact, your family was one of the first families to come to the area. Could you tell us a little history of your family?
Family or homesteaders here out on the Cape itself back in the 1800s. They were mostly all fishermen. And fishermen didn't have much to do because a lot of the times they were very poor. Their version of surfing was driftwood that would come up on the beach, something off a shipwreck or that fell off a freighter, or during World War II, it could have been off one of the German subs that was sank off the coast. So their version of surfing was a little bit different. Beachcombers were also a term for people that hung out on the beach a lot. They would gather sticks, driftwood, shells, make driftwood art and things, mostly for themselves because tourism hadn't hit the Cape. Cape Canaveral itself did not have any bridges to get to it. The closest bridge was now called Minuteman Causeway, and that bridge went across Merritt Island to what was called SR4, now called South Banana River Drive, and that was a main thoroughfare. So fishermen, to sell their product, if they couldn't get across by boat, would use neighbors' trucks or a local fish house, and the trucks would transport. They traded a lot of their fish for vegetables and things they couldn't grow on the islands. So as growing up, Cape Canaveral where I lived was mostly dirt streets. You had two paved roads, A1A, the original, which is now called North Atlantic Avenue, and Ridgewood Avenue. And everything in between was all dirt. Close to our house, roughly a mile away, was the Eberwine family. And our family and the Eberwine family were the two closest families to have a telephone. That shows you how old and how spread out things were. But that area, as growing up, surfing came in the 60s, it became real popular. We did then start our own little revolution. Surfers were clean cut back then. Flat top haircuts, they had the boards, they worked pretty much, but then the change came. The boards started getting shorter, the shortboard revolution. The hairs started getting longer. Lifestyles were changing, music was different. You still had the Beach Boys, but then you also had the Beatles and Eric Clapton and things right in there. So surfers were identified a lot by basically a lot of hippie music or hippies.
So when you started, how old were you when you started surfing?
Well, the first time I actually stood up on a surfboard was a guy in our trailer park that my dad owned, rented, and we went to the beach and he put us on the board and gave us a shove because we were far too little to paddle the longboard, and you just stand up and put your hands out and go straight for the beach. So that's about 1964. This picture here, it's in 1966. It's in front of our home, and this is called an Atlantic. Atlantic was a pop-out built by a company called Surfco, owned by Bill Feinberg. Pop-outs were basically a cheesier built board. Other pop-outs were Velzy, Ducana-Moco, Cutlass. These are the ones you could buy at the different, Sears and Roebuck. J.M. Fields was a popular place to buy cheap surfboards. Surf shops were just starting to move. Ron Jon was in Central Cocoa Beach. Now we're shut up and fish. And the boards would go at an angle down the wall because they were all 9, 6, 10 foot, 11 foot. So the shops were, very small in their inventory also. Baggies weren't the popular thing yet. Kids were still using cut-off jeans and whatever. Baggies came later, or good surfer attire. So when the surfing came, it was like a wildfire. Everybody wanted to be a part of it. The girls all wanted a surfer boyfriend. The guys all wanted to surf because that was the cool thing to do. Convertibles with a longboard sticking it out, then you were the real styling. Surfboard racks on an old ragged car would change the appearance of that car because now it was a surfer's car. You could see the racks. Aloha was a real popular rack then. Like a spring with a piece of rubber hose over them, and you would literally hold the board down tight. Other racks all came about, but that was one of your better of the racks. Then the little surf shops started spreading. Cape Canaveral had one of its first surf shops was a Maury Pope surf shop. It was a family called the Rosenberries. John, Tom, and Ron. And Bill Eberwine sold his first surfboards in a shop. We're in there. Now it's a little teeny produce stand, but they were selling pretty good. Blue Machine was Maury Pope's famous board at that time too. Slip check was being used instead of wax. And instead of just putting slip check on the nose for nose riding, the Blue Machine was solid slip check. It was like paddling sandpaper and grit. I mean, it was awful. But they moved down into Cape Canaveral into an old nursery, and then they had more boards, took on more shapers. Back then, you could buy one of Bill Eberwine's surfboards, believe it or not, for about $40, $45. But Bill was an innovator of his own. The shortboards were coming in, longboards are out. So Bill and a friend of his, Jim Bush, they would take at Bill Eberwine's house in this chicken yard. Mary Ann's been there plenty of times. He would strip the glass off the board, put a block down on the ground, lay the board on top of it, the old foam blank, what was left of it, then put another block and warp it. And that was to give it rocker. They weren't used to planers and the high tech that came along in the shaping. And then he would glass them right there in his chicken coop. Guys like Pat O'Hare also glassed in Bill's chicken coop. It was quite a little thing to see. Big poster of Jimi Hendrix on the wall. A lot of the boards they were making had to have color, pegs and different others because of the chickens. And then the chicken
We
was
used to call those chicken bug blankets. And they were cheaper than the regular blanks. They had holes in them, so you had to use opaque fiberglass over it. So I said I'd like a chicken bug blanket, please.
And can you talk about how the beach was in those early days of when you first came? Like what the water was like before the dredging, and how it was affected by, how the waves were affected by the port and the shrimping boats and that kind of stuff?
They played a major part. The watercolor today does not even compare to the colors that you and I saw back in the 60s and the early 70s. It was more azure, and on different days, I mean, it was just, the colors would just amaze you. Even if there was no surf, just the color of the water and the cleanness of the beach. Then the shrimping industry was very big. This was a big part of well, the nets have chains and the big doors, and they'd be side by side going back and forth, dragging for shrimp. Well, they would level out a lot of the little sandbars and reefs and things. So as time went along in the shrimping industry, on any given night during shrimp season, it looked like a city. Shrimp boats, I mean, lights were everywhere. Then the dredging came. First they put in the first part of the Cape, short jetty, and then erosion started. Then it was time now to start filling in. There was a house, a family was named Applegate, and at one time the deed of their house said that they were 450 feet from the mean high tide line. So that's quite a distance from high tide. We have pictures in the newspapers as the erosion was so bad it came up and was undermining their house, and their house was starting to shift. They got a lot of trouble. They were taking junk cars, and my dad's crane would come in and set those cars around the foundation of that house to save it. Johnny Applegate was one of the sons that lived there, and he too was a big part of locals in Cocoa Beach or Cape Canaveral surfing. Applegate's Skippy Martin was a fabulous surfer that faded away through occupation and things you didn't see or hear from him anymore. But the dredging still today, we can have a sandbar work great for a while, and then sandbar's gone, and different surf spots aren't as popular as they used to be because they're dead. They don't have a reef, they don't have a sandbar to work on.
What was the pier like when you were a kid? Like, what was surfing the Canaveral Pier like, and who were some of the big names, and what did it break like? And so on?
The pier had its times, and when the pier was going off, the magazines, pictures didn't compare to what we had. We had this pristine color. People were riding longboards. And Canaveral Pier was not a tourist attraction. It was truly Canaveral Pier. It had a little concession stand on the south side of the pier that stuck out. Some people called it the boathouse. And there'd be a little right that would come off that boathouse that it would just wall up. I mean, it was famous for head dips, especially doing contests. That was your last little shot right in there. Problem was, it was a short shot. And when you came out of the tube or from your head dip, you were looking at poles and going right underneath them.
And if you'll remember, the shoreline is so much farther out than it used to be. It used to be in almost at the parking lot. And so you could surf almost all the way to the end of the pier, to the beginning of the pier.
Right at the ramp.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now I noticed when I moved back that it was yards and yards, like 100, 200 yards farther out, the sand.
And the concession stand doesn't work anymore.
Right.
Now they have 5 restaurants and call it Cocoa Beach Pier. A lot of us will still refuse to say Cocoa Beach Pier because for us it always
Pier.
has been.
The Canaveral Pier.
That's it. Dirt parking lot. Look, you could get a hot dog or a hamburger. Dick Tree had Shag Surf Shop up on the pier. Ron Jon later was up on the pier. Little teeny strip, probably about the size of this room. A few boards because they had their other shop. Rosenberry's later took over on the pier, and they were selling their brand of boards, which were Rosenberry's. 68, you had Jim Shipley. His boards were called Shipley Surfboards of Florida, and he had the outline of the shape of Florida, and his date established 1968, and he would sell them right off the pier also. So a lot of the good shapers came and went off the pier. You had these neighborhood cliques with shapers. Right around the pier was quite a few good ones. A guy named Dean Rich. Dean's out in Cardiff right now, still surfing, got his own little shop. But Dean would go to California with his buddies, stay at Surfboards Hawaii factory, and then start getting the decals, taking them home when he was making bootleg Surfboards Hawaii. Well, that didn't last very long at all. So then Dean switched over because he worked at New England Oyster House, and the fish had just came out for our coast. So Dean would take the fish off the Oyster House menus and call them Oyster House fishes. And you had their little, like almost like the Jesus, the Christian symbol for the fish on his boards. Fish riders back then were Scott Busby, Mark Crowell, Mike Tabling, and those three, they were famous for them. George Easley, was definitely shining.
The first person I ever saw ride a fish was Gary Cropper
Yep.
at Canaveral Pier, probably about 1968 or 69.
Right.
And no one knew what that board was. No, it was something that no one had ever seen before. And it was short. It was a lot shorter than anything anyone was riding.
David Nueva made the fish for George Greeno, which he was a surfing movie producer, photographer, and it was something that was a fast, wide, stable board that George could ride with the surfers in Hawaii. And when they saw how maneuverable it was, then it just went on. Still today, we're still riding, a lot of us like myself, a traditional, true, basic fish.
Talk some more about Gary Proper and Claudia Codgens and some of these guys and what their effect on the community was and how people sort of looked at them at the pier and about the surf clubs and stuff like that.
No,
Well,
you go ahead.
I don't know as much probably as Mickey does about it. I think he started surfing a little sooner than I did. But definitely like the Hobie team with Gary Proper, and I know old buddy Greg Lohr was on the team, and it was a great team because they had a little money behind them, and they could, like for instance, when we all went to Cape Hatteras to a U.S. championship, I got to ride along with the Hobie team and Gary Proper's new Dodge van with a new cassette deck. Nobody had seen a cassette deck before. Of course he had it. And when we got there, I had raided my mom's cabinet and gotten all this canned food to take so I could have some food. And they would go out to dinner and, just kind of get treated right. And I was eating my canned, ravioli and SpaghettiOs, and I still thought that was great. But no, the team members of some of the teams, they really had it good. And what was another team? Surfboards Hawaii had a team.
Surfboards Hawaii had the big team. Hobie had a big entourage. David Balsharak was Hobie team. Gary Proper, Dickie Munson, now Richard Munson was Hobie. Jimmy Morgan, Mark Crowell, Dave Dietrich, Jay Hughes. When they showed up for a contest, Hobie. But Surfboards Hawaii had a good team too. Bill Bringhurst was sponsoring. He was the man from Hawaii, from Surfboards Hawaii. Plus he also sold Sundeck baggies all over the East Coast. They had Jimbo Brothers, Jimmy Morgan, and we were just talking before a buddy of mine, Dave O, died. I said, Dave, you were one of the greatest side slippers at the pier. And with his weak voice, he said, no, Jimmy Morgan. And side slipping was the new little thing. Guys are making their own fins, taking fins and cutting them down, going to little hand side fins so you could side slip, just to popping the tail loose and drop straight down. 360s off the bottom. Fin first, cheater 360. But the team was a big thing. But to all young surfers, to be on a team or have a team shirt, oh boy, you're there.
That was the best.
That was the best.
I remember, you might remember which team it was. I can picture it. In the late 60s, even before I started surfing, I'd go to Merritt Island and do the skating rink thing, and some hotshot surfers would be there from Cocoa Beach, and they had on navy blue jackets with the white competition stripe around it.
That's it.
And I'm not sure, was that Belzy maybe?
Oh, Dewey Weber had, a lot of them had them, and they had the Weber patch right in the back of the white stripe. You'd have the big Weber patch. And again, team riders got free baggies, free t-shirts, all your contests were paid for. If you were real good, even trips to California to the factory, meet the shapers that are shaping your boards, things right in there. Mark Crowell and Jimmy Morgan would have Hobie or Surfboards Hawaii patches on the bottom of their baggies. So when they go into a big bottom turn, you would see Hobie or Surfboards Hawaii right there on the bottoms. And it was a big deal. Now famous guy, Charlie the Tuna, which was one of the good guys that came out of the pier, which when I was in my teens, he was just a little kid on the beach, but he was growing up fast and going to be definitely bigger than I was. He you have these old t-shirts? Let me have one of your old shirts. And I'd say, now he had billboards with his picture and things on them. And it was a big treat.
I think back then too, I think teams had more, they got more. I know people could actually make a living surfing back then in the 60s. And then when the late 60s and 70s came, when I started surfing, not so much. I mean, I felt really lucky to be sponsored by Oceanside Surfboards, and I got my way paid in the contest, my entry fees and free t-shirts, like you said, which I cherished when it said team
That's it.
on it. And in that era, there was a lot of free soul surfing, and the money just wasn't there for the team riders, and that's in the Spaghetti-O days.
Who were some of the other women that were in the teams?
Oh, let's see. When I first joined Oceanside team, I actually approached them. I was very shy, but when it came to surfing, I thought I really want to be on the surf team, and I love Oceanside surfboards. I had bought my first brand new one from Ron Jon. It was an Oceanside V-bottom. It was a pintail V. It was 8 foot when the boards were starting to come down. And so when I was ready to be on a team, I went and approached Bill and Marjane Feinberg. And as he remembers it, I tried to trade my horse in on a surfboard. They didn't have a use for a horse, but they said, well, we have a team rider, Cynthia Foose. So Cynthia Foose was a team member back then. She was a really individual person, like a lot of us are. She was another one who couldn't see very well without her glasses on, but you had to surf without your glasses on. And so there she was in the water, but she was a great surfer, intelligent woman, and so they said, we have a team rider. So, that's great, but right now we don't need another one. So I did my best to get on that team, and I went out and started entering contests, and when I got some results, then I went and approached them again, and they welcomed me to the team. So that was kind of a big deal for me, because like you say, you see these people when you grow up, and you kind of idolize them, and
Sometimes envy them a little.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So
That's when you got into doing ding repair? at
ding repair,
Oceanside?
I did. Of course, you need gas money, and I would fix dings at the Oceanside surfboards, and what a great job, because you could do it when the surf wasn't up. And I also started my sewing career there. They told me that they would buy as many shirts as I could make, because they had another store in New Jersey. And so I got some designs together, started sewing some hippie shirts. And, the rest is history. I'm still sewing today, and I would make my living either doing the dings and or sewing their shirts for them. And I paid my way to Hawaii the first time by sewing shirts for them. So they were pretty smart too, and when money wasn't that available, they were creative, and I could work for it, which I was more than happy to do.
What about localism at the pier? Would there be a problem if like some guy from Orlando tried to come out and paddle out at the main peak there?
Oh my gosh, you weren't welcome. You weren't welcome. And we had the little kook, so they had to go down the beach. And sometimes, if they would cut you off, you would shoot their board and towards the pier, maybe not intentionally getting it close, but maybe the next wave might just happen to pick it up and take it to the beach after hitting a few pylons like a pinball machine. And the younger ones were a little worse than the older ones. Gary Proper, Bruce Valusi, Claudia, they were a little more laid back, because they had a little more maturity. But some of the young team riders just getting started, it was their pier, that was their break, and you weren't welcome there. They called it, dog pack, and you paddled out to the dog pack because they would eat you alive. And there was a lot of localism, but each neighborhood had their own sandbar. Like Arthur Avenue had its sandbar. So you stayed in your neighborhood, but as times went along, then you could move up. And once you got to be in their little circle, just like anything else. And for a lot of people, surfing was perfect for us because we weren't the athletes at Cocoa Beach High School or Merritt Island High School. We didn't play football and all that. We called them the rah-rahs. So we had our own little cliques that could stay together. And so camaraderie was good, but come competition time or when we got in the water, no, it was every man for themselves.
And I think women had a little bit different perspective in that too, but a lot of it is your ability to surf and your ability not to cut someone off and know when you're cutting someone off and when you're letting them have their wave it's their turn.
Right.
So I think that's a lot of it, although women surfers did have a different vibe in the water. Most guys were great, although you had to be able to surf. If you didn't, and you did cut them off or get in the way, you weren't welcome. But as you learn to surf better and better, you were more welcome. And it's a real camaraderie type of thing. And if there was like a group of people like that, I don't know if it lasted very long. I mean, there are ways to diffuse that too, even back then.
Age played a big part.
There you go.
You outgrew it. And the pier was where it had its own localism because you had so many houses and streets right there. Places where that dog pack didn't prevail was if you went down to picnic tables, first light, second light, Spanish House, Shark Pit, the inlet. Now they were coming from everywhere. Melbourne Beach guys, they come up from Vero Beach. So there you were now not king of the hill anymore. And the fishermen on the pier, on the jetties at the inlet, they would think they owned the water just like you did. So they would take sinkers sometimes and shoot at you. Or you would watch them with a big treble hook casting way out. And sometimes the fishermen didn't like. The rivaling got so bad at Sebastian, Dick Tree had to organize a thing to try and get the fishermen and the surfers to separate, or the fishermen and the surfers not to separate, but to get a little more camaraderie. So rules were established where the fishermen could start and where the surfers couldn't go. So you didn't have the fishermen casting right into where the surfers were. They went farther out on the jetty.
Do you remember in the old days, Mickey, when I first started surfing the inlet, and I can't tell you what year it was, I'm going to say it was maybe 69, there was a yellow line that was drawn down the jetties. And if you had a surfboard in your hand, you had to walk on the inside of the inlet side of the yellow line to get to the beach. You couldn't walk through the property. And you could go check it. You get out of your car and you go check it. If it was good, you had to come back to your car, walk across the yellow line, all the way down the jetty, over to the surf.
That's it. But that was the things that Katrie and this little committee had to work out to keep because those fishermen, they had just as much right to be there as everybody. And they've probably been fishing there longer than we had been surfing there. So that was a touchy area right in there. But there were so many miles between the inlet and Melbourne Beach. You had these little secret places, Wells. Wells was a little trail in between some palmettos where a house used to be, and there was an old well, and sometimes it would just dribble. So the surf spot got called Wells. Then there was Shark Pit. Shark Pit, you could drive almost up to it, nice little dirt. People got stuck there all the time. But again, you walk through the palmettos, and there was a lot of little places like that you could go to. And like Marianne said earlier, the farther south you would go at that time, that's when the surf was better and better. Still today, the water clarity and color between Melbourne Beach and Florendana and Cocoa Beach are like night and day difference.
but the pier was like the iconic spot, right? That
Oh,
was
yeah.
like and could you talk a little bit about that? Tell me that one story about the guys coming from over the bridge.
Oh, hitchhikers. They had a rough time because they had long boards and different boards and nobody wanted to pick them up. Surfers didn't have room for you because their racks were full. So this one occasion, waves had been building and building, and they knew on this one Saturday morning that it was going to be the best because the wind was going to lay down and it was just going to be right. So a couple guys went back into the by the pier, and then there was no condos. It was all palmettos and little trails where there's also horses that lived across the street, nice little corral. So people would hide their boards into these little palmettos so they could hitchhike home and come back. Well, these guys, local pier dog packers, went and in the bushes and collected every surfboard they could find, took them farther down the beach and left them in one big pile. Not damaged, just the next morning we're surfing and you could see them on the beach. They were in a panic. They were the one, they were back into the bushes looking around and looking around. Then they found their nest egg. By then the tide and the wind had switched and we were out of the water, and then it was their turn. But little things like that happen to them pretty frequently, pretty frequently.
When did they start decorating the surfboards? It became an art form, actually. Some we have photographs, and who used to do that?
Well, a lot of the early shapers started off doing their own work. Spray cans. Mike Gray, who's his pictures right in here. Mike Gray would cut out little templates and use a spray can and do stars or different things right in there. Bill Everwine would take resin and splash it in tie-dye type of boards there, and then he called it D&T. And it was this cloth that could be anything like from your mom's curtains that had a floral print, and you'd lay that over and they would glass it in with it, and that would give it color and different part to it. These boards are done by Bruce Williamson. Bruce and Mike are one of the earlier guys into doing airbrush, actual real airbrush. Mike Nimnick was another one that was a heavy-duty innovator. Glenn Branch was definitely right there, and he did vans, motorcycles, surfboards, and all kinds. But a surfboard could start at $100, let's say. But then if you wanted to have the airbrush, you wanted fine pen lines, especially if you got some guys like Tommy Moss, their pen lines were just like hairs laid on top of each other. Scott Busby showed everybody how to make those type of pen lines. Now, your board just would have made it maybe $150, just in options. They would add air, the color was extra, pen lines would be extra, airbrush would be extra on tool. But
I was gonna say, here's a picture of oceanside surfboards that I found in an old magazine, and that is all pen lines on the deck there, on the middle board. And it was just a real popular thing for a while, just to get real fancy. And I remember Marjane, do you remember that board? She did Alice in Wonderland.
Alice in Wonderland.
You know, on the whole surfboard, all like pen and ink type of stuff. And then it was a gloss coated over, but the whole scene, like from small, the whole board was covered with that.
A lot of those boards never saw the water.
Exactly, that one I don't think ever did.
They were right there.
Right.
But there again, personality played a big part. There was a factory down in Melbourne Beach, two guys called Toome and Reeves. And when everybody's into all these colors and pen lines and early airbrushes, Toome and Reeves boards were clear because we have nothing to hide. That was their motto. So all their boards just were clear.
That was a good way to make a board pretty cheap, wasn't it?
Good cheap board, easy for ding repair. And Freddie Grosskreitz followed him behind. He would take a bookmarker with Jesus Christ picture on it and cut the 10 Commandments or whatever, the 23rd Psalm, just leave the picture of Jesus, and he'd glass them in up on the board. And it was sacrilege if you waxed over Jesus' picture. And then they were all white opaque, because Freddie would shape and Bill would glass them, or they'd work together, because Freddie Grosskreutz was definitely one of the early glass guys that set the standards, as well as was a teacher. Guys that he taught later were Dave Dietrich, Ed Towns. Ed Towns is still doing ding repair now. So everybody had their guys that they would teach, and we got the Leon Lane gang talking about the little neighborhood cliques. A guy named Roger Williams, and Roger was a lifeguard and one of the early good surfers in that area. Never got into the contest scene, didn't have to. He could get enough attention just by going in the water. But he'd glass a little bit, and he loved shaping. He'd go to your house, your mom's brand new Delmont 88 would now be covered in white foam. You go to Ron Jon and buy a blank, either a Walker or a Clark. And then he'd send Mike McAllister, Jay Schaefer, or young Stuart Sharp at the time, out to get his little supplies, because Roger was king. He didn't have to go to buy anything. Everybody did it. Dave Dietrich was a part of the Leon Lane gang. So just from Roger's teachings, you had Dave Dietrich, Stuart Sharp following the shaping. But here, Sandsbury, Dave Paisley, all learned from the local shapers. That there was no school that you went to. Just somebody take you under their arm.
And you think the whole culture of backyard shaping in and around Cocoa Beach is the reason why we have so many good shapers nowadays in this area?
Yes.
I used to rent a room from George's surf shop in Cocoa Beach,
Right,
South Cocoa
George
Beach.
Patton.
He used to rent the room and the planer for $5. And I'd buy a blank and go back there, and it's a great way to start. You didn't have to invest in a whole building. And of course you took it home and glassed it in your own garage. And a lot of us had garage floors that our parents weren't too happy with, but that's the way to get started. And I don't know, I shaped and glassed quite a few boards, although I didn't really get much more than doing it for myself and my friends. But it was another way to express yourself, and there's nothing like writing something that you've made. It's just a great, great soulful feeling.
Yep. Scott Busby and Pete Dooley had contact surfboards. And later, as they were growing, George Easley had natural art. So Scott, when things started getting busy, and now they were doing big production, maybe 35 surfboards a week, which was pretty good out of a little teeny shop. So Scott shows them how to glass, teaches how to shape, and there again, all the guys learned through Scott. And the ones that Scott took under their wing, they turned out to be the masters, because Scott did not tolerate anything that wasn't first class. He's got a shop now still in Hatters. He's been there probably pushing 35 years. And it's in the eye surf shop with natural art. And still today, for the old timers, you talk about the days of early shapers in Cocoa Beach, Scott Busby right there, definitely on the top with Freddie. And they all worked together. It was, hang out and learn from each other different things. Freddie was a little on the rougher side. Scott didn't like to watch Freddie glass, because he didn't want to keep his factory intact, because Freddie could glass and smoke a cigarette at the same time, taking his hands and washing off the acetone, and the cigarette's hanging right over the bucket of acetone. Freddie just keeps on going. There was little things like that separated each one.
What's the size of the largest board that was ever used, called a long board, and the shortest board?
I know there's a lot of 11-footers were around for a while. And shortboards, there was people riding in the little twin fins when they started out. 4'11", myself, I had a 5'2".
What was a boogie board?
Boogie board, They were, what, 3 foot?
I don't even know if there were big boogie boards back then.
They were just basic.
But we did have skim boards.
Skim boards.
Skimboards, yes.
Skimboards, yeah.
Talk about skimboards.
Well, everyone used to skimboard before they surf. It's kind of like skateboarding. Skimboard is a piece of plywood that you get out of your garage and shape in a surfboard type shape and sand off as much of the little sticky parts as you can and go to the beach. And if they were round, you could throw them like a frisbee. And if they were surfboard shaped, you pushed them down, ran and jumped on them, ran as fast as you could and jumped on it and go as far as you could. So that was, to me, that was surfing, like introduction to surfing between skateboarding and the skimboarding.
And in between good days, when you were bored to death and you just had to put something under your feet and move, and you could take the skimboard and a little ripple coming up to, you know, the shore, you would shoot your skimboard and boom. Skimboards were famous for hurt and scratch, bruises, elbows, knees, back of your head.
Only young people can do that because, you know, you're a little more flexible then, so instead of breaking your neck, you just had a sore neck.
I wouldn't think about it at my age today.
Either. So what about the shortboard revolution? Can you talk about when the shortboard revolution hit Florida? Not only obviously it changed the shape and the style of surfing, but what else did it bring in terms of cultural shifts?
Well, the shortboard came, you know, started off in California. Just like a lot of things in Florida, all came from California and Hawaii. So when the shortboards came, it changed a lot of people's style. Because in longboards, you were into being class, finesse, nose riding, you know, tube riding, just get in the pocket and trim, watching somebody that could truly walk the board. That was nice. Then when the shortboard came, now let's wrap these things around our neck. Let's go right for the top from the bottom. You could do late takeoffs, which you'd never think about on the longboard because you're just going to stick the nose in the bottom, you know, the old purling days, and no coop cords at that time for either shortboards or long ones. So a lot of people younger started off with a shortboard. Their styles were going to be different. The ones that were on the long boards, they were still trying to get the finesse down. They wanted to ride with class. These are some classy pictures. Mary Ann, right there, that's just as clean of a ride as you could ever ask for. Then you get into the short boards, like with Jay Schaefer right here. This one's only 5'11", and he's a 6-foot person. Yep. Mary Ann showing the radical turns with the short boards. And short boards for smaller people were like God sent. Because, I mean, you could carry them. You didn't have to have 2 towels on your head.
Exactly, Mickey. When I first tried to surf, I rented a longboard at the Cocoa Beach Pier, Canaveral Pier at the time, and I couldn't even carry it to the water. I had to get help to carry it to the water. But at the same time, I'm glad I learned on a longer board because my style was a little smoother, like exactly like you said. And then when you progress down into the short board, you automatically have a smoother style.
And you take more chances when you went to the short board. Like I say, the late takeoff was something that it was just unheard of for the longboard. You could just turn one punch and gone, and actually you'd be at the fastest part of the wave just like that. No long drawn out turns.
As far as like the culture change, like you were saying, I think Mickey kind of touched on it where in the mid-60s, the surfers were very clean cut. And as it progressed into the shorter boards, and it was a little bit of the era as well, people started growing longer hair, beards, mustaches, hippie shirts that I used to make at Oceanside. Things were changing a lot then. And so the surfing lifestyle changed. It went from the Gidget, Annette Funicello era to, I don't know, you know, the early 70s where I want to say anything goes, but it wasn't like that. I mean, if you were a serious surfer, you might have looked like that on the outside, but I was in bed by 9:30 every night, because if it was gonna be good in the morning, I was gonna be able to get it tonight. There was no internet to check the waves. You had to physically get up and either ride your bicycle or hop in the car and go check the waves. And so you wanted to be ready for it. So for me, it was a pretty clean lifestyle back then, and it was because of the fact that you wanted to be able to catch the waves and surf as good as you can.
That's it. For my dad, he had two leverages. I'll take an axe and cut your surfboard in half, or I'll cut your hair. So parents, if you wanted to surf, a lot of parents used it to keep you in good shape, keep you healthy, and things right in there. But then as you get older and you get the driver's license, then surf trips. You just didn't go to the inlet to surf, you camp out. People went from cars and vans were real popular. I had a Chevy van at one time, even had 2 sets of racks on it because we were loaded for bear. And there'd be 4 of us in there, but you brought 2 boards because you didn't know what it was gonna be. Like Mary Ann said, you predicted, but you didn't know.
One of my favorite surf trips was myself and my neighbors who surfed. Like Mickey said, you had the little gang of people, and everybody, had their own little gang, and so we got together, and the one with the best car was Terry Bushnell. He had a VW microbus. It was a beautiful thing, and in fact, this is a picture of us going to Cape Hatteras. It was on the ferry going to Cape Hatteras, and that's Ricky Carroll in the background there at age 15. But surf trips were awesome, and we didn't have a lot of money. We camped, and for me, buying a space in a campground was luxurious because it had the showers, and so we went up to Cape Hatteras, and every time we'd go up there, we'd get great waves. And run up the lighthouse when you could do that. Those are memories that last definitely a lifetime, because the camaraderie with your friends, the waves that you catch, you'll always remember that. And I have to tell you a little story about Ricky that time. It's amazing he's still here because, being young, we were all at the campgrounds, and we went and visited some fellow campers from the area down the way. And this was our social life at night. We'd go to a different campsite. And Eric Rhodes had a bag of marshmallows. And somehow someone thought it would be funny to see how many marshmallows Ricky could hold in his mouth at one time, until he took a breath and sucked a marshmallow down his throat. And the mood went from just a riot and a lot of fun to, oh my gosh, this is not good. And I remember Terry Bushnell was a big guy, and he did the Heimlich way back then, and he got him from the back, and he was nothing. And I put my finger in his throat, and he coughed out that marshmallow. And we all stopped and looked at each other, and without saying a word, went back to our campsite, went to sleep, forgot it all happened, and went surfing the next morning.
Great story. How about that picture of the gang up there? Tell us something about that. That's a cool picture of the 70s.
This was in the 70s. This is Steve Andrus. He's passed away and gone. I'm not really sure who this guy is right here, but in the middle with the white hair from California was Dick Brewer. And Dick Brewer was famous shaper, surfer, entrepreneur, just a lot of different things. He'd come to town, he liked to eat a lot of vegetarian food. He was very, very healthy. And right next to him is his wife there, and this is Jimbo Brothers. Jimbo was also Surfboard's Hawaii team, Dennis Feigner, Jimmy Morgan, and right next here is Duncan Curry. Now Duncan was a cool guy. The first Surfboard's Hawaii shop, there was 2 brothers, Fletcher Sharp and Chase Sharp, and Duncan was right there working in the shop, and him and Bill Bringhurst and all these guys they lived in Melbourne Beach. They had the prime surfing all to themselves. And on the very end, this is Mike Gray, the airbrusher. So they're up in Hatteras, the Vitamin C surf shop, and working their way. They were doing an East Coast tour. Well, when you got together with your friends, there was nothing better than to go surfing and watch each other, and then talk about at the end of the day what your waves you caught, how much fun you had, and sometimes even just a kid and say, you didn't do so good today. It was all in fun.
So what about Ron Jon? Talk about like the early days, because this is like the biggest surf store in the world, I guess. So, and it's right here in Cocoa Beach. So talk about the evolution, the early days of Ron Jon.
It was little when it started off, just with strictly longboards, and then they moved in to the shopping center where now their big building is. It was a strip mall. They were right next to a restaurant bar called the Samoa. And out in front of the Samoa, they had torches with tikis and things right in there. So Ron Jon had one little box that he rented. He was just getting started. Freddie Hillman was working there. Eric Olson, just learning to be a photographer, wanting to be a photographer, was just learning. And a lot of these pictures here in black and white are old Eric Olson pictures. Willie Hickman was a funny guy that worked there. He had his own little laugh and his own little look about him. There's a little guy named Donnie Shank. And Donnie had a little brother that could get in more trouble than anybody, Dougie. And Dougie liked to bust Willie's chops all the time. He would go around the corner of the payphone and call him up and ask him what the surf was like, because the shop was on the pier, and a little one, and Willie would tell him, then he would make some obscene, crude remark to Willie. So one day, he's had enough of Willie. So he takes little Dougie in behind the shop, pulls down his pants and runs with him, and leaves him standing back there naked. These tourists are walking by, and Willie comes back and says, "You want to see a big dead shark? Look behind the building." And they come, and here's this little kid about 12 years old smoking a cigarette, naked as a jaybird. And they're just like looking at him. There was a board out called Hollow Wave, and they were one of the first composite boards. They were hollow, and they had a plug. And if it leaked, you just pulled the plug out and you drained it. Well, little Dougie rode the Hollow Wave, and Willie all the time was going and pulling his plug and throwing it somewhere so Dougie couldn't go surfing, to keep him out of the water, keep him out of everybody's way. But Ron Jon was a place you went when there was no waves. They got bigger, started getting the next booth over. You walk in, it smelled like fiberglass resin because he had the ding repair. And remember the wicker floors, the braided thing, you could smell this wicker, very strong. But there by the ding repair was the girls' dressing room. So the little guys would sneak back and go on top of the, through the hole in the roof and check out the girls' dressing room. Well, there was this very large girl one day that went in. And so one of the guys gets up and he's in the little hole and he's thinking that it's going to be a good looking girl. They're saying, wait, go see this, go see. Well, we find out she's a shoplifter and she's packing up her clothes with bikinis and all this kind of stuff comes out. So reporter. So she gets arrested and they're pulling out baggies and bikinis and stuff out of her thing. But local boards were just going to be popular, the backyard boards. So what's Ron Jon do? If I can't sell you a new or used, I'll sell you blanks. So he had Walker foam, Clark foam, he had barrels of resin, he had the cloth, everything right there to build a board. But that didn't stop because resin art was becoming popular. Hatch cover tables. So Ron Jon's now building hatch cover tables. Big old piles of them out in front of the shop of hatch covers. Levi jeans. He made a fortune off Levi jeans.
I used to buy my Levi's there, and I think they were the first people, I don't know if they did it on their own, but they used to pre-wash them. It was the first pre-washed Levi's you could buy.
Oh.
Because if you remember how they used to be, you had to wash them 3 times with bleach before you could even wear them without getting a rash.
What did you pay for them?
$8.
That sounds about right.
About-
Yeah.
That
yeah.
sounds about right. And it was expensive. That was a lot of money to pay back then.
And if you didn't wash them, the blue dye would come out.
all your
absolutely.
clothes.
You couldn't wash them with anything else for sure.
Yeah.
And if you wore them, it came off on you too, right?
Right,
And the
right.
shrinkage, you had to get them just right, the size. But Ron Jon worked his way up to being the #1 Levi sales. Dirt bikes were happening. He gets the next building over. Coopers, dirt bikes and things. So he's got that going on. And there's Jay Hughes. Bill Vollmer's now involved in the shop, which later he left the shop, opened up his own. He called them Little Hawaii Shop. And you don't hear too much about Bill anymore. But you still see a few of the boards in somebody's garage or hanging on the wall. He had an airbrusher that did little things for him. And it was Mike Gray, Bruce Williamson. They did a lot because they were the early 2 that went to work for anybody. You just call them up, like dial an airbrusher, dial an artist, and they would be right there. Before it was all said and done, Ron Jon had bought literally the whole strip mall was Ron Jon's.
When it was smaller, I remember saving my money, working in summers, and I bought my first new surfboard from Ron Jon. And it was what I was saying earlier, the Oceanside surfboard. And that was a huge day for me to be able to walk out of that shop. But my choices at the time, in that summer, probably 68, the choices were from a 9-foot longboard down to a 7-foot V-bottom. And in between was an 8-foot V-bottom with a pintail, and that's what I chose to start. And it was great because it wasn't so short and radical that you could still have the long drawn out and nice style.
You'd almost knee paddle it still too,
Definitely knee pads.
especially you and I.
Yes, but the smell that you're talking about, that brought back memories, the little mat that they had in there, and it was so laid back then. I had a dog named Lucy that was my best friend, and I could take her anywhere. I could take her to the beach. I was at Second Light. I could take her. She would find somebody to play with, somebody to dig a hole for on the beach while I was out surfing, and then greet me when I came in. So back in that day, it was just a lot more free. And I remember bringing her and Ron Jon, and they had a big bloodhound in there. And he started baying when she came in, and she was so scared. But that just reminds me about how I don't think you could walk a dog in there today.
And also, if you remember correctly, most of the streets were dirt streets with no stoplights, no stop signs, and we used to ride our bikes on the beach. Remember?
Oh, yeah.
Talk about how it was to go all the way from Cape Canaveral all the way down the beach, and also about the cars on the beach.
We used to drive on the beach at Lori Wilson Park, if I remember right. That's where we'd go in, and I guess you could go all the way down to
You go at 520, you could
Coconuts.
go in and
Yeah.
and through Cape Canaveral, there was, because they were just dirt streets that went right to it, people with beach buggies could
Right,
drive.
right.
And
It wasn't like Daytona in that
No,
it wasn't
no.
quite as car friendly, so there was a lot of cars that got stuck. And riding bicycles for sure on the beach, and people of course still do that today, but yeah, it was a lot more laid back then.
And there weren't any condos either.
no,
That's right.
the beach was empty.
As a young girl on the beach, do you remember up in Cape Canaveral, you started in Cape Canaveral, when there used to be morning glories and passion flowers? that grew-
Absolutely, the
Well, tell us
purple.
about that, and the Australian pines.
The
remember?
Australian pines, I know that there's a reason they're eradicating the pines, but to me, that's such a great memory. And I was at the Holliver Canal yesterday, and there was a grove with the pine trees, and we walked through them, and we're talking about how nice it is, and that sound, there's just nothing like that sound. But yeah, it was maybe a lot more natural then because there was not a lot of condos, although they are, thank goodness, doing some conservative efforts and for the dune crossings and stuff. But then at the same time, I kind of miss walking that sandy path to the beach with the morning glories on the sides and little daisies. But yeah, just a different time back then. And Cape Canaveral was a special place. And remember, Mickey, when it got so big that you couldn't surf anywhere else, you surfed on the inside of the jetties in the port.
Right, yeah, underdog contest was one of the best days inside of there. Underdog contest was put on for people that had never won a contest or even made it to the finals. So it was like a fun thing. Well, that day, it was epic surf. Right in between the jetties, it was perfect. 6 foot, sometimes bigger, and all the big guys that would be in the water generally and pushing everybody out of the way, they're the judges. So they sat back, watching guys. So we got your first chance to really, have good waves by yourself, and the guy you're surfing against, you got a better chance. I remember in one contest that I rode in ESA, I think it was 3 people in the contest. Jeff Crawford, David Balgerak, Mickey King. And that's just how the contest ended too. And then nobody even needed to go in the water. They could just rode that one right on out. And Jeff Crawford was from Cocoa Beach, first one to ever win the Pipeline Masters. He was a Titusville boy. Titusville had its first early surf shops was the Nickel Brothers. Nickel Brothers had an egg company, their family. They were good friends with Bill Eberwine, and Wally used to spend a lot of time there. But they had their own boards they learned to make, nickel surfboards. And right there in the historic section, well, back then it wasn't a historic section of Titusville. It was just an old little part of a street like Cocoa Village, and here's a little shop selling wax to kids from Orlando or anybody that was headed for Play Linda or on your way up to New Smyrna. If you forgot something, you could go into Nickel Brothers.
What was your most memorable surfing day?
Oh, there's too many of them. And it's like you saying, what's your favorite food or your favorite song? Some days when you hear this song, it's your favorite. Or they're
Biggest wave.
Oh, biggest waves. It was surfing on Spanish House, and we were riding back then, or wearing sleeves, and they just came down to your baggies, and they had long sleeves, and they were great for the wind, but they had flaws, bad flaws. And on this day, it's huge. I'm coming off the bottom, waves are going like 70-30, and 70 was closeouts, 30% makeable. And I come off the bottom heading for the top because I know this is going to be a goner. I get caught, thrown back, and the water got under my vest and put it over my head, and I'm bouncing the bottom, can't breathe, and it's black because it's covering your face. And I'm finally getting through, and I'm seeing feet and hands and boards paddling right over the top, as you're going. But the waves that you did catch that day, now they were as faster than you've ever been in there. But surf trips are a big thing too, because there you're surfing waves out of your neighborhood. So you've got to learn that wave, and you're the new kid in the neighborhood. I was up in Hatteras, and it got cold, and I didn't have a full length. But my friend Scott Busby and his girlfriend at the time, now wife, Carol Cartland, I borrowed her wetsuit. So here I am standing at Frisco Pier in a stand-up tube in a girl's wetsuit with a little boobie sticking out, and I'm at it. Long hair is blowing and stuff right there. Yeah. Carol, she just laughs. She said her favorite thing is if she didn't like something, it's gross, Mickey, that was gross.
How about your largest wave that you ever had?
Here in Florida.
In Florida.
Definitely, when you said that, what sticks out in my mind is a special day down at Shark Pit. I don't know, the waves were probably 6 to 8 feet, And when they say stand-up barrels, it means you could stand up straight without bending down, and the wave would come over you, and it wouldn't be touching you. And I remember on that particular day, of course, getting in the tube was the ultimate goal, right?
Yeah.
You know, you can cut back, you can do all these things, you can make the wave, but the tube was the bomb. So I just remember getting so covered up this day that I could actually see the whole tube in front of me. So in other words, you weren't halfway in the tube, you were so far back you could see the whole thing. And then coming out and certain waves spit. So if you came out of that tube with your hair coming this way, that was the bomb.
You were being spit out of the tube.
So that was probably my most memorable surf session, I would
That was a
say.
left, I'd imagine.
Definitely a left. Definitely a left. If I'm a goofy foot and I'll go right, but you know, there's nothing like a front side tube.
What was your worst day?
Worst day. I'll tell you what my worst day was. When I was 16 and I'd just been surfing for a short time, it was at Arthur Street in Cape Canaveral. I was finishing the day and I bent down to pick up this board and it flipped up from a wave and hit me in the throat. Well, it fractured my larynx and I didn't know it. Well, I knew I was gonna die, that's what I knew. And I ended up having to go to the hospital, and I did have a fracture, and it eventually got better, but I had to whisper my total senior year in high school. So the worst day of surfing is when about a month later I went surfing for the first time and I couldn't get outside. I didn't have my breath because my vocal cords were paralyzed, so I couldn't get a breath. And I couldn't make it outside, and I was crushed. So that was my worst day of surfing.
Mickey, what was your worst day of surfing?
Oh, hands down, a friend of mine, Jeff Haney, makes Ocean Image surfboards, and he was a Gordon and Smith Team Rider Oceanside shop also in his younger day. We're surfing Wabasso, and it's about 5 foot, and it's a sucking out on the inside. I mean, water, sand, and everything up. Wow. And I'm just pushing myself a little too far, and I went to kick out. And when the board got vertical with the wave, it slammed the board into my face, busted these 2 teeth out, which I already had problems, and broke my nose. So I didn't know where the blood was coming from more, my nose or my mouth. And we're just like, man, this is a bad, bad day.
So there are a lot of joys, but a lot of bad days every once in a while. But that's what keeps you going, right?
Such is life.
Yeah. If you, who is your the surfer that you think is the ultimate surfer?
Man, well, growing up, the California guys, because you saw them in the magazines and most, and they always in the movies. And Drew Harrison was up one of my favorites. Billy Hamilton was probably right there at the very top. He was one of the most cleanest, that you could imagine. And BP. And BP was a master of sunset, just like Lopez was the master of the pipeline. But you'd see Lopez surf the pipeline in one picture. He's yawning while riding this huge wave, and he's coming over, and he's actually yawning. Has his hand on his mouth, yawning. But I would say Billy Hamilton, Drew Harrison, BP.
And what time period were they at their peak?
The late 60s and early 70s. Now Billy Hamilton's son, Blair, is riding 40-foot waves, and his dad thinks he's the nut.
And for you, who was your idol?
Definitely my idol was all over my bedroom. It was Jerry Lopez. He was such a smooth style master. And like you said, but I think what he was doing, let's analyze this and think. The nose tweak was big back then.
Yeah.
The nose tweak was big, because when you get out of the water, then you just go like that. And then I used to practice holding my hands exactly like Jerry Lopez. You know, surfing was a good obsession. But that was definitely my favorite surfer. And again, it was probably the late 60s, early 70s when they were in their heyday.
Now, in that time period, there weren't too many women surfers that went the ultimate test.
Well, you know, there wasn't that many, although it's funny, we pretty much all knew each other. And if you're in contests, like I had a lot of friends from all over, from New Jersey, from down South Florida, from West Coast. Because we were such a small group, everyone did know each other, and it was a good camaraderie. And like Mickey was saying earlier, you know, when you're in the water and you're competing, it's one thing, but you know, when you're on the land, everybody's all friends. And so yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of women then. It's so nice to see today how many girls, young girls, older people aren't intimidated to surf, because back then, without having a lot of role models, you're breaking a little ground. Now there were some, but yeah, it was a bit different back then. And like I said, it's really nice to see so many girls surfing now, and I know there's a lot of women that make their living surfing, which is awesome.
So that has changed through the years, and you very rarely see any advertisements or with women in them for surfing gear, that type of thing. But has that changed today?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I think in the 60s, I remember Joyce Hoffman, and I know, again, the 60s was one thing, the 70s kind of waned a little bit, and then in the 80s it picked back up. But there's even individual surf brands like Roxy that are strictly women's surf gear, and I know they do a lot to promote women's surfing. So yeah, it's changed a lot, and for the better.
And what's coming up?
What's coming up?
Yeah. What?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I believe it's a 3rd annual Women of the Waves, Florida, and it's going to be September, I believe, the 28th, 29th, and 30th. And I've been to it, and it's you know, it's people from Meyer getting back together. It's young people. My one friend has a granddaughter that comes and surfs. So there's all ages, and it's a fun, positive promotion of women surfing and get together. We have some surfing socials, they call it, in the morning, and you know, unlike the guys, we have the full spread underneath the tent on the beach when we come in. So you might come up and have some chips and dip and go back out for some more. And it's just a really fun thing, and I know my friend Sharon and Melody do a really good job on putting that together.
And where is this held?
Where is it?
Yeah, where is it held?
The Cocoa Beach Library will be the start of it on Friday evening, starting off with the film. And I'm not sure where the surfing socials are going to be, but they are going to add an SUP event this year as well.
And does everyone go out and actually surf, ride the waves?
Absolutely. You know, I don't surf so much anymore, but I'll go out there and give it a try as well.
Very good. And Mickey, what's coming up in the surfing world for the men this coming weekend? Isn't Doctors and Lawyers? Are you familiar with that?
This will be the last one, isn't
The
it?
last one?
I think this will be the last one, even though it started here with Jack Kirschenbaum. And growing up, Jack Kirschenbaum lived in our neighborhood, and he had one of the finest quivers. I mean, we were lucky to have one good surfboard, just one board per person. Now, but Jack had several. I saw him a few months back, and I was saying, man, if I had the boards that you had today, he said, oh, if I still had the boards I had back then. No, so coming up, it's going to be interesting for the last one, see what they're going to do for the grand finale. Or maybe it's just to gear it up so they come back next year and save like, popular demand. But when Jack started it here in Cocoa Beach, it did spread to California and Hawaii. It's a great charity fundraiser, and to see a lawyer in a coat and tie and long pants hanging 10, that's something to see.
And where is this going to be held? Is it Sebastian?
Sebastian.
It's
That's where
Sebastian.
it has been in the
Yeah,
past.
that's where it's going to be. Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about today about the surfing world of yesteryear, or what's happening today? Or do you still surf?
Still surfing, not like Marianne, not as much as you used to, and you get older and you get a few bang up things happen to you, so you're just not as apt. And if it's not good, it's not, like you have to go like we used to. Any time you had free time, if it was this big, you were going to the water. But that's what made you a good surfer, because if you could ride and milk junk, wait till the good days came. And that's what separated you from the next guy, because they didn't surf junk waves.
What happened to some of the young guys that lived in Cocoa Beach that were so popular, like Gary Proper and all those guys? Are they still around? Or?
Gary's still around. He has his business, Phantasma Production, which he does everything from rock concerts to boxing matches. But his real claim to fame after the surfing that made him probably his fortune is when he introduced to the public Ninja Turtles. When we were growing up, his father was the judge in Cape Canaveral, Irving Proper. And if you got a speeding ticket in Cape Canaveral or got in any trouble, you had to go up to Pier before Judge Proper. Gary had a brother, Jerry Proper, and he had a little clothes store. They called it the Proper Collection. But he was also one of the first ones that showed Bill Everwine and Steve Holloway and about how to play racquetball, because he was he needed somebody to play with and things. And Claudie's still around, shaping his own boards. His family, his kids have grown up. My mom used to love when Claudie would come by our little boat dock shop with his kids to get sodas, because Claudie was always the charming one. He was always just smiling, and just Claudia was something in his time. Yeah. But
I remember all these little boys from Cocoa Beach when I was on the beach. I used to call them little towheads. They were just brown as berries with these little tans and blonde as could be, and just absolutely adorable. And I bet you were one of them.
oh,
weren't
yeah,
you?
we were towheads. We would get caught swimming.
Here's the towhead himself.
There he is, right there. Yeah, look at that.
A little cutie, Mickey.
We get caught swimming in this Polaris motel by the pier, and they would throw us out, and we would wonder how did they.
I used to swim there.
How did they
How you
spot?
rinsed off.
Yeah, how did they spot us? Why did they pick on us? And they could look at you. We're the towheads, and the other kids are pink and
We thought we
sunburned.
blended in.
Yeah, hey, we're kids too, we can jump right in. But they got a little vengeance. One of the locals, back then Salvo had came out with the Salvo soap tablets, so they threw a box of them in Polaris's pool, and for a little bit of revenge. Or there was one man that lived in around Leon Lane, Pasco Lane, and the bus stop was in front of his house, and when the kids would check to surf, because it was right by the ocean, and they would run and skip school to go surfing, he would be the one to call their parents. So they did little gags to him, like popped his hubcaps off his car and put finger mullet in each one and put the hubcaps on until it rotted and made noises, and the cats in the neighborhood. And he went up to a local Phillips 66 shop where old Mike McAllister worked, a man named Hodges Bilbo. And they put it up to check the thing, and the first hubcap opened and the junk came out, and then they just knew what was all the rest of the tires were going to be. So just like other kids, we had ways of a little revenge.
But that was actually all harmless. And
It was all harmless. It didn't hurt his car.
Hurt anybody.
No,
It didn't
no.
hurt
It
anything.
wasn't like some people, was no vandalism,
No,
let's put
no
it that way.
vandalism, that's
No.
right, that's right.
And mooning was big back then as well.
What?
Mooning was big.
Mooning, oh yes,
back then.
mooning.
Very,
was-
very big. We
yes.
call it the pressed ham. That's when you put it against, like, everybody had vans or
Yeah.
state thing, you put it against it and give it the old rubbery dub. Yeah. My mom thought it was something on a menu. We had to tell her, Mom, no, green eggs and ham, pressed ham, no. They're not on the menu.
Well, is there anything else you can think you'd like to talk about today? I think you've pretty well covered it.
You know, when you were talking about how it's different now and then, what I liked about back then was, you know, and it might be the same thing if you're young again, but we just felt like we were such adventurers and so lucky to be doing what we were doing. And for me, I was doing exactly what I wanted to do, and I wouldn't want to do anything else but surf back in those days. But today, you know, people have a chance more of maybe making a living at it. Maybe the industry's grown a bit where you could make a living either surfing or doing something else in the industry. And I think, and also the acceptance of surfers now as opposed to back then, although through the years it got better and better. For a while, if they thought you were a surfer, for me, being in contests made it legal to be a surf bum. So it helped in a lot of different ways to do that. So I think that's it.
And it was a much simpler time back then too, safer. You didn't have a lot of the things that are going on today that young ladies had to worry about back then.
Well, you might, if you didn't know it, that was okay.
Yes.
You know, we were smart. I mean, you're smart. Although we did take a lot of chances as far, you know, the danger thing, like jumping off the inlet into huge waves.
With the board still on your arm,
Yes.
what a stupid thing that was.
Well, you do that once, and then
Yeah,
you'll
with
do
your
that
arm
again.
behind your
Uh,
neck, collarbone.
Do you remember ever swimming in the ocean at night with the effervescence? How beautiful that was. That
Absolutely.
was paradise. Talk about that just a little bit as a woman's perspective.
Well, you know, what I really remember that is recently, with the invention of the SUP, we were just talking about that. A group of us get together and go in the river with the fluorescent going on, and it's one of the coolest things I've ever done. You see the fish, you see the outlines of every fish. If you go in the right spot, it's flat, so the fish can't dive down. And I actually had one jump out and hit my leg, and when I got in the car, I smelled like I'd been fishing. That's how close you get to it. So that's, you know, my most memorable is most recent in doing that. So it's kind of fun to be able to continue on with surfing in that aspect as well.
How about you, Vicki? Do you remember what that used to be like
Oh.
and the magic of it?
The true-
Diamonds in the
the-
water.
The true magic. Or the worst letdown was, you should have been here yesterday, or should have been here this morning. And things right in there. Or you get the one guy that they just maybe partied a little too hard one night, but like we were talking earlier, you're getting up early because you're going to go, so you're knocking on the door. Guy comes to the door, he's got a cigarette and he's twitching, and music's still blaring. It's like 6 o'clock. You go, man, you look like hell. He goes, yeah, it costs a lot of money to look like this. But the stand-up paddleboard is just like another leg of surfing that you don't need waves to do. You can do it in different places anywhere in the country, and that is it's going to be passing kayaking, and for a while kayaking being one of the #1 fastest growing water sports. But stand-up paddleboards are excellent because you see them in groups now, and groups can stay together and don't. No, that's it. It's quiet. And the age groups too. Stand-up paddleboarding is for the young as well as the older ones. So it's something for everybody. I mean, you can go and put your dog or your child on this paddleboard, and you're standing there, and it maybe reminds you of like in the biblical times when Moses was going through the bulrushes, or little Tom and Huckleberry and all of us with a raft and a pole and We'll see where we're gonna wind up today.
And I think if you look back when you were young, as young people surfing and experienced the power of the waves and the beauty of the water, you had a real connection to the earth. And I think that's something that we all felt back then, that we had a connection to the earth because you were a part of it and you could feel it in the water.
It was our church.
Yes.
Being out in the
yes.
water was our church.
Yes.
And it still is today. When you go out, you feel so close to nature.
Yes. And that's something that I don't think people realize, that that in these this type of atmosphere, or these sports and the surfers, that they do have that connection and they have appreciation for the natural world, and because they read it all the time. They read the waves, they read the wind. Something else that you might want to mention, how about a new sport that's come up with surfing? Is it called parasailing, whether you use the
Kite
surfing.
yeah,
Kite
kite surfing. Have you ever had the experience of doing that?
I'm too old.
That takes a
I'm
lot
too
of
old.
strength too, doesn't it?
No, a lot of strength and
Yeah.
no, and being my whole life on the water, see, these guys aren't even thinking about what's underneath you. We're talking things like horseshoe crabs, stingrays, broken things with barnacles. This is salt water, so
Yeah.
things have barnacles, and it's a lot more dangerous than regular surfing. But to watch them, what an art form, and the colors are brilliant.
Yes.
I have to say, it does. It looks amazing, and I've wanted to do it, but I just kind of know better, because I'm the kind of person that push myself too much, and like Mickey said, that, and also you don't know when it's going to carry you over the land. If you have to really control it, so it's the kind of thing I think you have to develop. And for me, I'm the kind of person that goes too far, and surfing is fine because you fall off, it's just water. You could drown, but it's still just water, where that's a little bit different perspective.
Yes.
It's a wind sport more than a water sport, really. It's almost like, or, parachuting, or
They've been doing it on the beach for decades
Yeah.
in salt lakes. I mean, the kite and little things on wheels is nothing new.
Yeah.
Like I said, the wind sports, and what Jimmy Buffett said, when you harness the wind, the feeling you get when you harness
the
it,
wind.
and now you're on the
Yeah.
move. It's like that wave, when you're not harnessing it, he's just letting you go along for the ride.
And that's when
they
you
launch too. They go up like 20, 30 feet in the air.
Yeah.
exactly. It does look fun. Stop it.
That just takes it to another level, right?
That's it.
So we'll leave that for the younger people to
That's
do,
it.
and we'll just watch and wish we
Enjoy
could
it.
do it, right? Well, thank you both for coming today and talking about this wonderful sport of surfing and a wonderful era that you were able to enjoy when it was in the infancy, and you watched it grow and you grew with it. And we're very, very happy to hear your stories.
Thank you. It was an
Thank
honor.
you.
Honor
Thank
to be
you.
here.
Thank you.
And it was an honor too. We should be giving you the applause.